we look forward to organizing for you all. So we have a few very good dynamic speakers that are ready to talk about their experiences, and as well as two partnering for climate projects that will share stories from their projects on the ground. So wanted to take a moment to highlight that. And next slide, please. Just a few quick reminders for this session. Next slide, Veronica, please. Thank you. So since this is a webinar, we ask that you please use Zoom chat for any comments, reactions, and links. If you want to ask a specific question to one of our panelists, just let us know through the Zoom Q&A feature. Also, as a reminder, this webinar is available in French and in English. So I'm speaking in English now, but we do have a translator that is online. So if you prefer French as your language, just click the interpretation button that is below your screen, at the bottom of your screen, excuse me, and click the French channel. She is there and ready for you. This dialogue will be recorded, so we've set up a recording for both the French and English version. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to join us today, they won't be able to miss it entirely. So before we get started, I just wanted to review what we're doing as NAbSA and who we are at IUCN and what our goals are a part of this dialogue. So NAbSA stands for Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Adaptation, Monitoring and Impact Evaluation. It is part of Global Affairs Canada Partnering for Climate portfolio. And so what we do is we essentially try to improve climate resilience and reduce poverty for vulnerable communities in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we do this by providing capacity building support and technical support to about 19 projects, also part of the Partnering for Climate community, all in Sub-Saharan Africa and about 22 Sub-Saharan countries. And so we do this through increased design and implementation of nature-based solutions, including through the IUCN Global Standard, increasing evidence through the Biodiversity Climate Nexus, as well as scaling up nature-positive and gender-responsive adaptation actions globally. And that includes getting involved in numerous policy-making events. So one of the requests from our projects were to highlight their work, and we're doing this through the NAbSA Dialogues. So these projects have a lot to say and a lot of great stories to share, and we want to capture them and show them to the wider international community about conservation and biodiversity. And so that brings us to our overall calendar. We've already had 3 great dialogues, the first on biodiversity, then ecosystems, and then gender. So now we're on our sustainable livelihoods and alternative enhancements. In September, we'll have one on green infrastructure for urban resilience. And then in September, coastal communities, October in terms of policy and governance for nature-based solutions. And then in November, we'll conclude our series for this year on financing nature-based solutions. So that's really what we're all about. And thank you again for joining us today. And I'll move to our speakers. So we have 4 great speakers for you today. Next slide, please. So we have 2 representatives from IUCN's Food and Agriculture Systems team who will be discussing the Common Ground Dialogues as well as their new framework for agriculture and NBS. So we have Mercedes Munoz Cañas and then Ursulia Naraya. I hope I'm saying that right, Ursi. Apologies if I'm not. And then we have Charles Ta from Farm Radio International talking about his project On Air for gender inclusive nature-based solutions. And then we have El Hadji Faye talking about his project in feminist climate action in West Africa. So thank you again, speakers, for joining us today. And I will actually briefly introduce our speaker, Ursi, who is a temporary program officer with Agriculture, NBS, and Policy Advocacy at IUCN HQ, based in Glan, Switzerland. She has a background in environmental management and policy. And as part of IUCN's Food and Agriculture Systems team, she contributes to efforts both in the development of knowledge products and in policy advocacy, with a focus on nature-based solutions in soils. And then Mercedes Munoz Cañas is a biologist and environmental scientist with over 15 years of experience in creating, developing, and monitoring projects related to international cooperation and environmental protection at both the national and international levels. Since 2018, she's been a part of IUCN Center for Mediterranean Cooperation, and she currently coordinates IUCN's work on nature conservation and food systems in the Mediterranean region. So welcome to you both, and I will pass the mic to Orsi for her presentation. So if we can get that back on the screen, and I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. So hello and welcome everyone. In my presentation today, I would like to introduce two unique tools to you that have been developed by IUCN and that can effectively support the design and implementation of nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So these two tools are the Agriculture NBS Guidance and the Common Ground Dialogues. Next, please. I think many of you are already familiar with IUCN's global standard for nature-based solutions. This framework builds on the knowledge and experience gained from ecosystem-based approaches. And since 2020, with its 8 criteria and 28 indicators, it supports the design, implementation, and assessment of nature-based solutions. The application of the global standard is supported by several sectoral guidance documents, and one of them is the Agriculture NBS Guidance. Next slide, please. The guidance aims to translate and support the use of the global standard in an agricultural context. So ultimately, in the design, assessment, improvement, and upscale of sustainable agricultural interventions. The resulting nature-based solutions should be able to contribute to positive outcomes for biodiversity and ecosystem integrity, to rehabilitating and restoring ecosystem services, improving food security and reducing malnutrition, preserving or improving human and animal health, deliver positive economic outcomes for farmers, and uphold the rights of farmers and indigenous peoples, especially recognizing their land rights and access to natural resources. Next slide, please. In addition to the guiding questions that the global standard and, for example, the self-assessment tool provides, the Agriculture NBS Guidance offers further guidance tailored to NBS in an agricultural context. This table illustrates this through criterion 3. Next, please. Some words about the next steps and further developments or future developments. The guidance has been tested in several pilot countries and currently is being adopted based on the feedback that we received from these countries. The next version of the guidance will reduce and simplify the explanatory text, add guiding questions, concrete examples, and case studies, and a list of tools, platforms, and means of verification that can be used for the assessment of each indicator. And now, switching to the Common Ground Dialogues. Next slide, please. So the Common Ground Dialogues are a series of multi-stakeholder dialogues at national, international, and regional levels that aim to develop bridges between the agriculture and conservation communities, jointly identify major sustainability issues, opportunities, barriers, and possible solutions, co-design project proposals, co-develop initiatives, coalitions that could be showcased at the World Conservation Congress next year, and influence policymaking so that land health is incentivized. The dialogues run from 2023 to 2025 until the IUCN World Conservation Congress. Last year, there were several national and regional dialogues organized, and this year there were 2 regional ones organized with a focus on Asia and as well as on Africa. And currently we are working on plans for further dialogues for this year and next year. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the agricultural NBS guidance has been tested in multiple pilot countries, and was applied to diverse projects with the aim to assess its effectiveness, identify potential gaps, and suggest improvements that will be integrated in the next version of the guidance. You can read more about these projects online. For now, I just wanted to highlight them. Next slide, please. Same for the Common Ground Dialogues. Here I just highlight 2 national dialogues and 1 regional ones. All of them were organized last year, and they all focus on issues and challenges that were or have been considered relevant and especially pressing in the specific context where the dialogues took place. Next slide, please. So overall, what IUCN can offer is, on the one hand, an up-to-date agriculture NBS guidance, support with the practical application of the guidance, capacity building opportunities and trainings, workshops to understand other IUCN tools and frameworks, feedback on NBS proposals in an agricultural context, help for NGOs in making their projects NBS aligned. On the other hand, we are also happy to help with the organization and facilitation of Common Ground Dialogues, helping maximizing the project's reach to a wide scale of stakeholders through IUCN's global membership and convening power, provide support to make stakeholder engagements effective and impactful, and finally assist in the co-development of national initiatives and strategies. Next slide, please. With that, I would like to, next slide. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie, for that presentation. Mercedes, I will go ahead and pass the floor to you to get us started on the framework.
Sure, thank you. So thanks for having us here. And today I'm going to present another tool that we're doing in IUCN. As soon as Veronica shares the PowerPoint, there it is. So is the guidance note on monitoring land health in agricultural landscapes. Next slide. Thank you, Veronica. Actually, just to put an understanding of everybody of why did we do this is because before doing the guidance, we thought about a framework. And before doing this framework, we went out and asked what is already available. So what we found out in order to measure biodiversity in agricultural landscapes, we found that there are many tools out there already, but most of them are very specific, meaning that they are just focusing on one type of scale, like soil or at landscape level, or very specific in farm practices, for example. And there are also, when we were looking out there, many indicators, most of them indirect, easy to collect ones, that are already available. But the truth is that when we did this research, that it took us quite a while. We took a very nice study about it, is that we didn't find a global tool that could measure biodiversity in the agricultural landscapes as an holistic way. Next slide, please. So that's why when we were thinking, so let's create this framework. And in this framework, next slide, please. What we found out is that we needed to have 4 different levels of monitoring. I would like to show you, but I don't know what is happening with the next slide. The thing is that, but I will just tell you. So there it is. Oh, there it is. So what we found when we were thinking is that if we want to measure biodiversity holistically in an agricultural landscape, we need to measure it in 4 different levels. And that is because we do think that even if you measure biodiversity in different farms, the sum of these farms will not give you the biodiversity at landscape level. So you do have to measure biodiversity in all those levels. The first one is field or soil level, farm level, landscape level, and then we added a national level in which we trying to make people think about all those things that are affecting biodiversity that are outside of your landscape. The way we do monitor this is you have to do it indirectly if you're monitoring biodiversity at landscape level, which will be more on habitat diversity, or at national level. On national level, what we think is, let's look at the policies that this region or country is committed to, and let's try to make the other three levels apply or be linked to these policies. For the field and farm level, it's more about direct sampling, going to the field and getting the functional diversity that we do believe it's the most important for the objective that you have. So that was the framework, that was the theoretical part. And now let's put it into the more practical. So next slide, please. And with that, what we did is a guidance in which we put this framework into a step-by-step process, and we are supporting the different organizations that aim to check and understand biodiversity at a holistic way in the farm landscapes, in the agricultural landscapes. And we provide this step-by-step. Like the first one is, please just look at the objective that you're looking for. Then let's look at the already available information that you have, what is already being done, and going through the different steps that I'm happy to discuss, but not in this moment, like if somebody's interested in another occasion. So in this guidance, what we have is the description of the different levels, and then the indicators that we do think, or we suggest that you can use in order to monitor those levels, and then tools that you could use to measure those indicators. At the moment, next slide, please, this guidance is being tested and used in several countries around the world. You can see the little orange crosses out there, in which we're just trying to understand, like if we're able to measure this biodiversity at all those 4 different levels and improve this guidance node so it could be as useful as possible. And with this, I'll just briefly stop what this tool is all about. So thank you, Zoe. Over to you.
Thank you, Mercedes. And yes, thank you again, Orsi, for both of you for really setting the stage for this discussion and adding some context on potential tools and frameworks and hinting at the important considerations that we need to have when considering and implementing sustainable livelihood activities in nature-based solutions projects. So with that, we will go ahead and begin our panel discussion. So if Veronica, I could have the PowerPoint back up on the screen so that we can introduce our 2 panelists. So first being, sorry about that, just technical difficulties. Veronica, we can't see the screen if you're projecting it. There we go. There we go. All right, so first being Charles Ta, who is a project manager with Farm Radio International and has more than 20 years of experience in the international development field, working in Africa and in Canada. He has a background in rural economic development and livelihoods and communication for development, recently focusing on climate change adaptation and sustainable development. And then we have our other speaker, Elhadji Faye, a sociologist specializing in natural resource governance and food security. He's worked as a researcher on gender and development issues in Africa and has a development officer on projects related to climate change, agroecology, and sustainable natural resource management. He's currently based at SOCO's head office in Montreal, where he is in charge of international projects. In particular, he coordinates the projects that he'll be discussing today, the Feminist Climate Action in West Africa, or ACFAO project. So welcome to the both of you today. And I will go ahead and give, just to really orient the conversation so that way our audience can understand the context of your projects. If both of you could talk about what you do and what your projects are about briefly. I'll pass the floor first to Charles.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Our project, like many other projects, has as ultimate objective to improve the resilience of communities to the effects of climate change. And what is specific to us is that we address this through three key strategies or intermediate outcomes. The first is really around the barriers that community face to really adopt nature-based solution actions. So our project as a radio organization, we are trying to mobilize communities, to break those barriers and take actions that will help them to adapt better to climate change, to the effects of climate change. So that's the first thing. The second is really around this gap between what policy makers know and what are the realities on the ground. And as a radio organization, we are trying to narrow this gap and bring policymakers closer to realities on the ground using what we call the NAbSA Dialogues, where we consult large communities and then we synthesize the results from these communities, and then we bring these policymakers together to have a dialogue with them about what the communities are saying, and they should be taken seriously in terms of designing policies that respond more effectively to the realities on the ground. So that's the second part of it. And the third part is really all the work that and the investments that the government of Canada is doing in Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa regarding nature-based solutions. How do we bring Canadians on board these efforts? So the third aspect is really in partnership with Carleton University. We're sending students to project countries to collect some of these stories. And then we can stream the podcast over here in Canada just to inform and engage Canadians more in this whole issue on the climate change adaptation in Sub-Saharan Africa. But the last thing to mention is that all the outcomes that we get from the project, we develop them into scripts and really spread the word about nature-based solutions across Sub-Saharan Africa, working with 200 stations in the sub-region, really to produce programs that have been adapted from the work that we do in the 6 focus countries in about 20 other countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So in a nutshell, that's it about our on-air for gender inclusive nature-based solutions project.
Thank you, Charles, for that introduction. El Hadji, je passe le micro à vous pour introduire votre projet.
peux y aller? Merci. Bonjour à tous. Mon nom c'est El Hadji Faye. Je suis donc le chargé du projet SICO, du projet ACFAO pour SICO. Le projet ACFAO, plus connu sous le nom de Action climatique féminine en Afrique de l'Ouest, est un projet donc porté par 2 organisations canadiennes, Interpares et SICO, en partenariat avec 8 organisations locales dans 4 pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, la Guinée-Bissau, le Sénégal et le Togo. Le projet intervient principalement dans les zones côtières et insulaires, et notamment au niveau des écosystèmes de mangroves où on a un certain nombre d'enjeux. L'un des enjeux que nous avons observé, c'est d'abord la vulnérabilité de ces écosystèmes au changement climatique, mais également la dégradation avancée de l'environnement et surtout une perte accrue de biodiversité au niveau de ces zones-là. On note également des pratiques agraires non durables, un système de gouvernance qui n'est pas souvent inclusif, surtout qui exclut un peu les femmes et les jeunes, mais qui est surtout souvent un peu fonctionnel. Mais également, donc, c'est tous ces enjeux-là, en tout cas, que nous cherchons à adresser dans le cadre de ce projet. Et l'objectif ultime, c'est vraiment de renforcer les capacités d'adaptation au changement climatique des femmes et des jeunes. Et pour le faire, nous adoptons notamment 3 stratégies. Travailler d'abord sur le plaidoyer en essayant un peu de renforcer les capacités des femmes, de mettre les femmes en réseau pour qu'elles aient plus voix aux instances, en tout cas, qu'elles aient plus accès aux instances de décision, mais également renforcer les capacités de gestion des instances, en tout cas, qui gèrent la biodiversité. Mais nous travaillons également sur un autre axe qui est la protection et la réhabilitation des écosystèmes dégradés, notamment à travers des actions de solutions fondées sur la nature, que ce soit les reboisements, les pratiques durables, les pratiques agroécologiques. Et le 3e volet, c'est l'autonomisation économique des femmes par le développement d'activités génératrices de revenus. Nous travaillons à faciliter l'accès à l'énergie pour un peu aider les femmes à accéder à l'eau pour développer la production agricole, mais également travailler un peu sur la conservation des produits. Nous travaillons également à appuyer les femmes dans tout ce qui est chaîne de valeur, c'est-à-dire faciliter l'écoulement des produits, mais également travailler à renforcer les entreprises rurales de ces femmes-là. Le projet a démarré le 1er avril 2023 et va se terminer le 31 mars 2024. Donc,
Merci
voilà un
beaucoup.
peu ce que je voulais dire en introduction en attendant les questions. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, El Hadji. So I'll switch back over to English, but clearly part of the Partnering for Climate Goals and a part of your projects is this element of biodiversity and ecosystems and showcasing or more so working with biodiversity and increasing biodiversity to help with the sustainable livelihood activities that you both have implemented. So in what ways can enhancing biodiversity within an ecosystem lead to more resilient, sustainable livelihoods for the people living there? What are your experiences with that?
Zoe, you have a preference for who to start?
Either or, no preference.
Well,
I know it takes the translation a bit to come through, so however long, yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and I think the first thing is a relationship between biodiversity and livelihoods. We know that without biodiversity, without the ecosystem, if ecosystems and biodiversity are degrading, livelihoods, of course, that depend on biodiversity and on the ecosystems are unsustainable. So a good example, I'm just coming from a field visit in Africa, and I was in Zambia, and you have what is happening now. Grazing communities in the southern part of Zambia are moving to the north because the biodiversity and the ecosystems have degraded very significantly, and it cannot sustain the livelihood activity, which is that of grazing. And then they are moving to the north. And what that means, moving to the north, for me, is unsustainable, same problem, just degrading the biodiversity and the ecosystems from one part of the country to another. And so the question is, if biodiversity and ecosystems are degrading, that simply means that livelihood activities are degrading. In fact, there is a study that I stumbled on recently done by Kelly Price in 2021 that tries to quantify, the number of people who are directly or highly dependent on biodiversity in the world. And that study is published in the Global Environmental Change journal. And there are 1.2 billion people who directly depend their livelihood, like directly and highly depend on biodiversity and ecosystems. And the question is, with degrading biodiversity, degrading ecosystems, what holds for the livelihood of these 1.2 billion, of which about half are from Sub-Saharan Africa? And the case of Zambia really speaks to that that trend that is happening now. So I would say that restoring and sustainably managing ecosystems and protecting biodiversity is crucial to sustainable livelihoods.
Merci, Charles. El Hadji, si vous voulez compléter.
Par rapport à j'ai pas compris la question.
Alors, comment est-ce que l'amélioration de la biodiversité et l'augmentation de la biodiversité peut contribuer à la résilience et à l'augmentation des moyens de subsistance durables?
OK. Bon, en tout cas, nous, le constat que nous avons fait, c'est qu'effectivement, les ressources sont très dégradées, comme l'a dit tout à l'heure Charles. Et ce qui en pâtissent le plus, c'est surtout les communautés qui dépendent directement de ces ressources naturelles. Et parmi ces communautés, on voit surtout que ce sont principalement les femmes et les jeunes qui vivent surtout en milieu rural. et qui sont donc concernés et très touchés par ces questions de changement climatique. Effectivement, les actions que nous faisons contribuent effectivement à renforcer, en tout cas, à contribuer à la réhabilitation des écosystèmes, notamment tout ce que nous faisons en matière de reboisement de mangroves, de mise en place de pépinières. Et on voit que la mise en place de ces pépinières permet de restaurer effectivement les écosystèmes dégradés, mais contribue également à aider les femmes en tout cas, à avoir des activités génératrices de revenus, notamment à travers la pêche, à travers l'ostréiculture et à travers d'autres produits dérivés pour lesquels ils peuvent avoir leur subsistance. Au niveau des forêts tropicales également, c'est la même chose parce qu'on contribue beaucoup à faire ce qu'on appelle les reboisements, qui en réalité contribuent à développer beaucoup d'activités, comme les activités liées à la cueillette, mais également, surtout l'apiculture. Et on a des partenaires au niveau du Sénégal, comme Apicen, qui travaille beaucoup dans l'apiculture de mangrove et qui est une activité qui concerne davantage les femmes. Et toutes ces activités ont pu se développer, continuer à se développer tant qu'on va conserver déjà les écosystèmes, mais tant qu'on va surtout aider à renforcer en tout cas les populations de plantes qui existent au niveau de ces zones-là, notamment au niveau des mangroves. Toutes ces actions combinées, en tout cas, permettent non seulement de réhabiliter les écosystèmes, mais également de renforcer la question un peu en tout cas, la problématique de répondre à la problématique de génération de revenus, mais également de sécurité alimentaire des femmes au niveau de nos zones d'intervention.
Merci, El Hadji. And so we talked about a few different activities. Both of you mentioned reforestation and replanting and restoration of mangroves, for example. So among those and maybe other kinds of strategies, what is the most effective strategy for integrating biodiversity conservation into sustainable livelihood programs? So open-ended question, whoever would like to respond first. Go ahead, Orsi.
Yeah, just a few thoughts. Well, I think that first of all, in any development, it's always good to build on the ecosystems that are already there, to enhance them, restore them, and work with them, and make them more biodiverse and more resilient to external shocks. But I would also say when we look at the application of the global standard, for example, it's important to keep a balance between the economic, environmental, and social aspects. So it cannot lead to overemphasizing one over the other or ignoring one over the other. So these are some general thoughts that should be kept in mind. But I'm happy to hear the others' views as well.
Yeah, maybe I should just jump in there from a communication for development perspective. While I was in Africa recently, that was a very enriching visit. I had to discuss with a cooperative that are fervent listeners to our program, and they have a very big nursery of 80,000 seedlings, and they intend to plant 400 hectares cocoa agroforestry. And they had different tree species, fruit trees, medicinal plants, all different kinds of species. And the question I asked them was, why do you develop nursery that is diverse as this? And they said that planting one species is creating a plantation, which is not what we want. But planting diverse species is creating a forest and enriching biodiversity, which is what we want. And she recounts the different elements that related to resilience of having such an ecosystem rather than a plantation. And so it came very clearly to me that once communities understand the relationship between biodiversity and livelihoods and their other aspects of life, then they will take the lead to do it. So for me, there is need for a critical awareness around that relationship between biodiversity and livelihood. It's very important. And once communities get it, they themselves will lead these processes and in a more sustainable way. But unfortunately, I think that this is also one thing. When our project started in 2022, I tried to review a lot of policy documents, national adaptation plans, NDCs, and all of those documents for the different countries, the 6 countries we're working. And I really did not even see the word nature-based solutions in those policy documents. And I was wondering that how can we, the last COP meeting was really around nature-based solutions and all of this, but policies don't support this. So for me, it's really supposed to be a policy issue, that how is biodiversity, how is nature-based solution integrated in policy frameworks in the country as a means to that drive resources to enhance biodiversity in the livelihood activities. If that is not happening, I really wonder how this will be very effective at country levels. Yeah.
Si, je voulais de mettre l'emphase sur ce que disait tout à l'heure Oshala, c'est-à-dire préserver déjà ce qui existe. Parce que les gens insistent beaucoup sur des activités de réhabilitation, de reboisement, alors qu'il y a en tout cas des ressources qui nous restent et qui méritent d'être protégées avant maintenant d'entamer en plus des actions de réhabilitation. Et pour ça, je pense que mettre l'accent sur les systèmes de gouvernance, les rendre plus performants, les rendre plus aptes à gérer en tout cas les ressources naturelles me semble très important. Et pour cela, nous, en tout cas dans le cadre de notre projet, nous nous appuyons beaucoup sur la valorisation du savoir endogène et des connaissances locales. Les communautés qui sont sur le terrain ont une façon de gérer leurs ressources naturelles, ont une façon de comprendre la nature et de pouvoir composer avec la nature. Malheureusement, parfois avec l'accompagnement, avec les interventions externes, on les coupe de ce savoir-là, ce qui fait que voilà, il y a une rupture en tout cas dans la façon de gérer les ressources naturelles. Mais pour nous, il faut vraiment insister sur cette dimension gestion locale, respect des pratiques locales et valorisation surtout de ces connaissances endogènes qui permettent effectivement de protéger et de renforcer la nature. Maintenant, pour le lien entre un peu les solutions fondées sur la nature et je pense qu'il y a un élément important que nos partenaires développent, c'est l'agroécologie. L'agroécologie est vraiment une méthode intéressante pour déjà adapter les pratiques culturelles aux conditions climatiques, mais en même temps, ça permet aux populations d'avoir plus de revenus parce que dans la façon de faire, on est moins dépendant des intrants chimiques, on est moins dépendant des pesticides, donc ça peut permettre de réduire les coûts de production, mais également en termes de durabilité environnementale et d'accès, en tout cas, à des produits sains et nutritifs pour les populations. Je pense que c'est un élément important, en tout cas, que nos partenaires portent et qui est vraiment à développer également. Maintenant, dans la façon de faire, il faut toujours insérer les projets, insérer les dynamiques dans ce qui existe déjà et surtout bien comprendre les contextes parce que chaque pays, chaque écosystème a son contexte, chaque communauté a ses réalités qu'il faut prendre en compte et je pense que c'est un élément également important à mettre dans la discussion.
Merci, Araji. Yes, I completely agree with those words, especially in terms of the policy, making sure that the policy is in agreement with like what Charles, you were saying. I wanted to maybe pass to Mercedes because I know there's some questions in the chat about NBS in agriculture, if you wanted to come in and complete on the topics that we discussed. Go ahead.
Well, it was, very interesting. And actually, many of the things that I could comment were already said. For us, it's key to measure biodiversity and let people understand how linked it is to the sustainable livelihoods, actually. And that's why, for example, when we are presenting this guidance on biodiversity, in this case, maybe on nature-based solutions, we can discuss it further and later. One of the things that we do is just to let people understand that you have a sustainable biodiversity in the different levels, then you most probably will have a more healthy land and everything, is really connected. So actually, this guidance on biodiversity is very linked to the other work that it's been done on NBS. I don't know, Orsi, if you want to comment on this, but for example, this guidance, the nature-based solutions standards have the criteria number 3, in which this guide note on agrobiodiversity could be merged and could be linked in a way that you're measuring biodiversity, you're making sure that you're taking into account all the levels of biodiversity, that you're linking it to the policy that it's out there in your landscape or in your region, in your country. And we do that not only because we do believe that you need to take into account the policies, because if you measure biodiversity in those 3 levels and you are aligned to the policies, you are supporting the government to get into the agreements or to comply with the agreements that they did. So they're going to support the work that you're doing. But at the same time, if you look into those policies, maybe they can just support the work that farmers are doing to enhance biodiversity. So for us, this link is key. And that will support as well the livelihoods, and that will, everything is merged and linked. And for the nature-based solution, as I mentioned, this guidance is supporting criteria number 3, but I don't know, Orsi, if you want to add something about how this guidance on nature-based solution or the standards will support everything.
Yeah. Well, the whole guidance is aligned with the criteria of the global standards. So obviously, criterion 3 is one of them, and it's a very, very central part of the focus of this guidance. But I just wanted to add that in addition to identifying the benefits and the potential outcomes of NBS interventions in an agricultural context, you also need to identify the risks and how you are going to address these risks, and come up with solutions that can either make the whole system more resilient to the anticipated risks and have some safeguards and some mechanisms with which you can address them. But you cannot focus on only on one criterion. So you always need to consider the entire context, and it's never only about the practices that you are actually implementing on the ground. It's about the way of developing these interventions and who is involved in the whole process, and on what scale, how are these mainstreamed, as you all highlighted, how you are mainstreaming everything that comes out to the policy level.
Thank you, Mercedes and Orsi. I wanted to, Mercedes, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because I saw, if you allow me, in the question and answers, there was one question that I just answered, but about, if I understood it correctly, how we can make a reference agroecosystem. And for the question is the definition of reference agroecosystem as historical landmark to be used to find the sustainable development strategies. And if I understood it correctly, and that's the way I answer it, if not, please let me know. What I just wanted to highlight is that biodiversity is very hard to compare. So you can, especially soil biodiversity, it can change soil biodiversity 1 meter to the next one. You can have a completely different biodiversity. So it's really hard to compare 2 areas, even if they're really close. Just for example, if they're in the 2 sides of the mountain, everything will change. So for example, the guide for monitoring agrobiodiversity in biodiversity in agricultural landscapes, we are comparing temporally the same area. And then we will try to use the different areas where we're using this guide note and to scale up the results to see, how are we monitoring biodiversity in these different areas. But we do not make the comparison because live biodiversity changes just, with many other things. So I just wanted to highlight how difficult it is to compare.
Thanks, Mercedes. And I was taking a look at some of the questions that we have in the chat and the Q&A, and I think We have one from a fellow Partnering for Climate project asking if any projects are interested in testing this guidance. Could they do it with your guidance in their projects? If either you or Orsi want to come in on that.
I think at this stage we are absolutely open to that. So I shared my email address in the chat. Feel free to drop me a line and we can have a discussion on that.
And I will do so. I mean, I did it in the question and answers, but really happy to, of course, test this guide on other areas. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you both. So we've kind of touched on a lot of key considerations for projects when developing nature-based solutions actions for sustainable livelihoods. I just wanted to take more time on that and what are some of those key considerations if we want to dive deeper when designing and implementing. So we've talked a little bit about obviously a key piece of Livelihoods projects and of Partnering for Climate is gender. So how does gender fall into sustainable livelihoods? Charles, your background in communications, how can that really be elevated and thinking about that and how can communications become integrated, more mainstreamed in nature-based solutions projects? So on those two ends, I think there's a lot to talk about, but obviously there are a multitude of key considerations. So I open the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I would just start with one of the key considerations that has to do with communication for development. You know, I think there's one IUCN assertion that we cannot address the societal challenges if we only implement isolated initiatives because they are isolated, so they cannot address issues, food security, the disaster risks, and water and all of that. So it is when this is done at scale that has the potential to address the societal risks or societal challenges that we're talking about here. And so this is the role of communication, to say that a key consideration here is that we really need to think about scale. The kind of solutions, either solutions or alternative livelihood activities that we are promoting should really be something that could really achieve scale, could be adopted at scale. So I think that's a very important consideration to have. But of course, there are many other considerations. I talked about policies and everybody has talked about policy as well, that policies, we really need to align our alternative livelihood solution or activities to policies. If these are not backed or supported by policy, if the government is not showing interest in this subsector or agricultural crop or whatever a livelihood activity, then we don't have a good framework to develop this sustainable livelihood activity. But it could just be a very good activity, and then we think that this is something we should engage with government about policy to take up this activity as an important livelihood activity. So it goes both ways. But other considerations for me I always think a lot about we shouldn't be promoting alternative livelihood activities that are not economically viable, because communities, rural poor people have limited resources. They have to invest in this. So we should always think about what is the benefit cost situation, if I may say, of those livelihood activities that we are promoting. If it is not viable in that rationale from an economic perspective to be promoting those activities, I think we should really promote what communities have been doing and succeeding with, showing that they are viable economically, also socially as well, because some activities may exclude gender groups and things like that. So, and of course, the ultimate one is also the environmental aspect of consideration. If the activity is not supporting or increasing nature in any way, least neutral, or then we should be promoting activities that really, otherwise it undermines the NBS efforts that we are making, right?
Oui, j'ajouterai juste un élément parce que je pense que insérer insérer les actions dans des dynamiques politiques qui existent déjà et par rapport aux orientations politiques me semble important, mais également les ramener à la dimension communautaire et surtout travailler à ce qu'on associe bien les communautés. Et souvent, c'est un défi parce que les projets, quand on les élabore, on a peu de temps pour faire vraiment les diagnostics qu'il faut, pour revoir les préoccupations réelles des communautés. Et c'est là où c'est important pour nous, nos organisations, de développer des partenariats solides en amont pour pouvoir bien travailler sur ces questions-là et faire en sorte, en tout cas, que les préoccupations réelles des communautés soient, en tout cas, exprimées. On fait de la consultation, mais il faut vraiment que ça soit une réelle consultation des communautés pour effectivement arriver à axer, en tout cas, les actions NBS ou bien les actions en matière de solutions, de moyens de subsistance durable par rapport à leur communauté et à leur réalité et à leurs besoins. Et pour ça également, nous, en tout cas, dans le cadre du projet que nous menons, on a déjà des partenariats solides avec ces partenaires-là, avec qui on travaille depuis longtemps. Mais dans le cadre du projet, on a également inséré de façon, en tout cas, systématique des activités de diagnostic qui doivent être réalisées tout au long de la mise en œuvre du projet. Et ce sont ces activités-là qui permettent de mieux comprendre le système agraire local, de mieux comprendre les différents types de vulnérabilités pour pouvoir mieux axer les actions par rapport aux moyens de subsistance durable et pouvoir adresser véritablement les solutions. C'est pourquoi nous, on parle beaucoup de solutions fondées sur les communautés, parce qu'après tout, c'est les communautés qui sont censées, en tout cas, recevoir ces actions et pour que la durabilité soit réellement en tout cas approprié par les communautés. Il faut vraiment insister sur cette dimension. On utilise également d'autres outils comme les cartographies participatives, la cartographie participative qui permet vraiment à toute la communauté de participer, le diagnostic territorial et beaucoup d'autres actions sur lesquelles, en tout cas, qui nous permettent en tout cas de mieux comprendre le contexte et de dessiner les actions, les adapter par rapport aux réalités des communautés. Pour le cas présent, l'essentiel des actions, c'est avec les femmes, bien sûr, et ce sont les femmes qui vont travailler. Mais pour une appropriation communautaire, on associe également les hommes parce qu'elles ont aussi un rôle à jouer par rapport à beaucoup d'autres facteurs. Donc, je pense que c'est important également de tenir compte de cette dimension. Il y a d'autres de nos partenaires, par exemple, qui travaillent sur l'exploitation familiale. L'exploitation familiale, c'est les femmes et c'est les hommes. Et dans ce cas, il faut mettre en avant les droits et la participation des femmes et trouver les moyens pour en tout cas faire en sorte que les femmes soient bien représentées et que leurs besoins réels soient pris en compte. Et je donnerai l'exemple d'un de nos partenaires, dont le membre, le CNCR, il y a un de ses membres, en tout cas, qui travaille sur ce qu'on appelle les assemblées de famille. Et c'est les assemblées où toute la famille se réunit avant la campagne agricole pour définir un peu les priorités de la famille en tenant compte des différentes préoccupations des uns et des autres, des femmes et des jeunes. Et je pense que c'est des outils importants également qui méritent d'être valorisés pour un peu mettre en avant cette dimension, en tout cas spécificité des droits des femmes et des jeunes, mais également prendre en compte toute la dimension communautaire pour bien cibler, adresser les besoins réels de chacun des membres de la communauté et effectivement avoir une appropriation du projet.
Merci, Raji, and thank you, the rest of the speakers. I will now fully transition to our questions from the audience. I see we have 4 in the Q&A. Oh, no, just 3 in the Q&A session. So I will go ahead and highlight Poonam Maskari's question. He says that one of the biggest challenges with trying to implement NBS in agriculture is the time needed to see any degree of farm level, landscape level improvement, which often is a few years, and seed funding for these projects in the early stages is incredibly hard to find and sustain during those early stages. Is there any evidence on where projects like this can find consistent funding to co-develop and implement regenerative agriculture practices? Whoever.
Yeah, it's true, and actually, it's one of the things that we always say, that many farmers do want to do the transition, but this transition is going to have a few years that are going to be very hard, and we need to support them on those years. And this is why there are many things being discussed in other levels in order to make sure that even subsidies could be, changed into what is needed at the moment in order to make these landscapes more sustainable. I do agree. I do not have, unfortunately, any recommendation or where to look for this funding, but I do agree it's one of the key things that we are working in to make sure that people realize that at the end for this transition, especially depending on how destroyed is the soil, it would take longer. So you just need to support the farmer while this soil is being regenerated. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any recommendation on finding some funds.
Well, I wish I had the magic answer to that. I can only acknowledge the problem that many times we have, when we look at the available policies, sometimes we have regulations calling for the application of certain practices. We have educational programs and trainings for farmers, but sometimes what is missing is the financial incentive that the knowledge alone is not always enough or mostly not enough to transition from unsustainable practices to sustainable. And many times, at least in Europe, those farmers who are large-scale farmers and can afford to take risks are sometimes more open to experiment with sustainable practices, but the same approach or attitude cannot be expected from small-scale farmers. So financial incentives are key, and it's true that even if there are some project funding available, it's usually for 3, 4, 5 years, and improving soil quality and soil health takes much longer time. So, but this is something that needs to be continuously indicated towards policymakers and decision makers, for example, through the Common Ground Dialogues or any other multi-stakeholder events.
Yeah, no, I do agree. We have seen those, that's one of the surprises for me when engaging with the communities, that they have expectations for us to continue supporting them, to support them materially and financially to be able to realize some of the nature-based solutions, which is something we did not really budget in our project, so it stands out as a challenge. And I think for now, what we can do is we need to analyze the needs of the project together with the communities in a very transparent way so that people can know the limitations and the challenges that are embedded in the initiatives that we are doing together, and think about what other partnerships and we can build to help meet some of the needs. I just believe that a single organization cannot do it alone. We need to think about different partnerships that we can build in the context of our initiatives. Yeah.
C'est ce que j'allais dire, hein. C'est vraiment la synergie déjà de ce qui existe, parce qu'effectivement, les ressources ne sont jamais suffisantes pour relever tous les défis. Mais si on travaille à avoir une bonne synergie et une harmonisation des interventions locales, on pourrait avoir un peu plus d'impact, à mon avis. Mais souvent, dans une zone, par exemple, pour les projets dans lesquels nous sommes déjà à Ziguinchor avec beaucoup d'autres projets. On essaie de mettre en place des cadres de concertation pour faciliter un peu justement cette synergie et essayer de voir comment, en tout cas, ensemble, on peut lever les défis. Maintenant, le reste, ça nécessite aussi une appropriation des initiatives par les politiques, que ce soit au niveau national, mais aussi au niveau local, les collectivités territoriales, les acteurs qui, en tout cas, travaillent aussi sur ces questions, la recherche, les services de vulgarisation et de conseil agricole. Une fois qu'elles s'approprient de tous ces outils et de tous ces outils et de toutes ces initiatives, je pense que on pourrait envisager une certaine continuité pour avoir un peu plus durable. Mais les projets sont malheureusement ce qu'ils sont, avec une durée limitée. On travaille sur des questions de biodiversité qui nécessitent beaucoup de temps, mais malheureusement, il faut s'adapter à ce que nous avons actuellement, essayer de rationaliser au maximum les projets que nous avons.
Thank you all for your responses. We have another question from Felix Junior Roni. So I'm translating this from French, but I believe this is more in question to what Orsi and Mercedes discussed with their presentations. But can we learn more about NBS or an example of NBS with one or two risks associated included? So Felix, if maybe you want to further explain your question in the chat, maybe then Orsi and Mercedes can respond accurately. But otherwise, if there are immediate responses, Orsi and Mercedes, please go ahead.
Well, my answer might be a bit too general, but well, obviously when we are talking about this intersection between conservation and agriculture, then there will be trade-offs that need to be identified and addressed, and there need to be strategies that can address these trade-offs. And I think there was another comment in either the Q&A or the chat that that there is always this transitionary period when farmers are switching from unsustainable practices to sustainable practices, that for example there will be either a temporary or a longer term drop in the yield, or a need for extra efforts to replace, for example, chemical weed control with mechanical weed control. These are all issues that need to be addressed, and there are risks, whether the farmer can afford the extra time or sometimes extra finances that are needed in this transitionary period, whether he or she gets any support with this, not only financial but also trainings and the knowledge to properly address these issues. So obviously there are many risks involved. But the goal is to make the whole system more resilient in the long run. So after a while, with the proper practices, the ecosystem can be more resilient to the external shocks and can increase the adaptive capacity of the farm and also of the farmer. So there is a solution for everything, but I agree that in this transitionary period, the just transition needs to be better supported to mitigate these risks.
And I agree. I really don't have anything to add, because it's the key. I do believe that farmers do want, of course, when you talk to them and say, you know, that when you do this, your land will be more resilient, especially adapted to what is coming, right? The climate change, and depending where you are, you will be more affected or less to the climate change. But the truth is that many areas have to adapt to what is coming. And when you tell them that if you promote and keep biodiversity in the different levels and you support to have a more healthy landscape, they do understand. The problem is the transition again, and they do have to feed their families next year. So we do need to help them in that transition. So, and for the nature-based solutions and the question, I do agree with Orsi. There are the criteria. I mean, the NBS, it does have one criteria on trade-offs, and you have to measure and you have to balance what is best for the area. And I just wanted to add to this, when Charles was mentioning about what the solution has to be economically available. I mean, there is another criteria in NBS that actually tells you, I think it's criteria number 4, it tells you, right, to make sure that you took into review all the different options of what you're going to do in order to make it as economically viable as possible. So the solution that you're finding and looking at, it's sustainable in the long term. And I think that here, when we talk about nature-based solutions and risk, the standards do actually ask you about the risk, just to make sure that you have the entire picture. And many of the risks that you will encounter, you already have seen it, and maybe you can foresee them before they happen, and you have, the solution. But if he explains, if we were not able to answer, we will wait for, another question.
Thanks, Mercedes. Et elle a dit, j'ai vu que vous avez beaucoup hoché votre tête. Si vous avez un exemple de ce qu'on vient de discuter, ou peut-être des expériences, and same for you, Charles, si vous voulez ajouter.
Oui, moi, c'est vrai que les solutions fondées sur la nature ont un impact à plus long terme, mais il faut gérer déjà le présent. Si c'est le paysan, comment est-ce que, voilà, il arrive à gérer. Si c'est aussi les règles par rapport à la gestion de l'environnement, on met en place des règles, on met en place un nouveau dispositif, mais il y a des gens qui dépendent de ces ressources et qui doivent aussi vivre. Donc, dans tous les cas, il faut trouver des alternatives. Parfois, c'est des activités économiques qu'on développe, et c'est pourquoi dans la mise en œuvre des projets sur les solutions fondées sur la nature, il faut beaucoup insister sur cette dimension moyen de subsistance durable des communautés, mais également insister sur la transition. Je pense que un agriculteur qui est dans son champ, qui a toujours utilisé les engrais chimiques, les pesticides, si vous arrivez un seul instant, en un moment, et lui dire arrêtez tout, on va changer, ça peut être problématique pour lui. Par contre, si on l'insère dans une dynamique de transition, il lui permet petit à petit de changer. Peut-être dans le long terme, on aura des résultats. Et je pense que c'est sur cette dimension-là qu'il faut insister, prendre en compte les préoccupations immédiates des communautés, et inscrire effectivement les actions de restauration et de réhabilitation dans le long terme, et prendre en compte les préoccupations immédiates des communautés, parce que c'est ça aussi les risques, pour que les communautés justement dévient les règles, ou en tout cas qu'elles n'adoptent pas les pratiques qui sont proposées. Maintenant, voilà, sur le plan de comment les actions de moyens de subsistance durable peuvent aussi impacter l'environnement. Nous, on a un exemple avec un partenaire de Syntag qui travaille sur la mise en place de forages solaires pour les groupements de femmes et pour développer l'activité de maraîchage. Mais eux, ce qu'ils font, c'est que chaque groupement réserve au moins 20% de sa superficie à la mise en place de pépinières villageoises qui vont contribuer à reboiser les espaces au niveau communautaire. Et ça, je pense que c'est déjà également une initiative très intéressante à valoriser, parce qu'il faut que les deux aillent ensemble, travailler effectivement sur, voilà, des solutions pour restaurer les écosystèmes, mais également prendre en compte les préoccupations immédiates des communautés à travers des activités de résilience climatique. Mais ces activités à leur tour également peuvent sur le long terme, en tout cas, avoir un impact, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, sur l'agroécologie, mais sur le court terme également. Avoir des activités comme ça peut permettre effectivement de concilier moyens de subsistance durable et renforcer la synergie avec aussi la restauration, la protection de l'environnement dans le long terme.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think most of all of the things have been said already. I really do appreciate the point on the trade-offs. It's a big issue, and alternative activities. I am seeing in Zambia the rate at which forest is being cleared for charcoal, which is a main economic activity, and wondering that if we have to take some actions around that, what would be the alternative for those communities? So very worrying situation there. And away from that, another thing that it has not happened, but we are very careful as Farm Radio when we do radio programming, is we have to understand that there are different interest groups in the communities, and we are talking about natural resources here, and implementing the nature-based solution run the risks of kind of restructuring access and the rights over resources and things like that. So there's a big risk there. Sometimes even in terms of conflicts that are embedded in communities. Sometimes we can go and, bring up those conflicts to become more effective conflicts. So there are all those issues. I'm remembering, like in previous work, where pastoralist communities are usually, because of their mobility, not considered as permanent as sedentary. So that's how the neighboring farming communities consider them. And when you start working with them to improve on their pasture, sustainably manage their pasture areas, that sends a signal to their neighboring communities that they are becoming permanent and want to kind of grab the land, and those kind of issues are very problematic, and we need to really know how to bring people together to discuss how to cohabit, what are the interest points, and how to manage those. I think those are very important. Those are risks, actually.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for all of those additions. I think unless there are any last-minute burning questions from the audience, we will go ahead and move to the mentee activity that we have planned. So I will go ahead and work on that. But one final request from our speakers, if each of you could just briefly touch on some key messages that arose in this dialogue, and any key thoughts that you have, and final conclusions, while I bring up that mentee. Whoever would like to begin, please go ahead.
Well, mine will be two. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
No.
Okay. Well, mine will be two. Just the first one is that for nature-based solutions, for livelihood activities to really yield and produce results for communities, we really need to address it from a policy perspective. Policy must start considering ministerial sectors, agriculture, livestock, and other rural sectors must start integrating nature-based solution concepts or practices in their strategies and plans. So that is for me very important. And the issue I mentioned about scale, we really need to work at scale. Think about scale, consolidate our effort, work in synergy, in partnership. If we are doing great work, we should be thinking about how do we scale the work so that we achieve results at scale. Thank you.
Can I go? Yeah, okay. So I would just say that we've been seeing pesticides, insecticides, herbicides. We do have believed for a very long time that biodiversity is our enemy and it's our ally, and it's the one that is going to make us more resilient. And we do need to have biodiversity as, one of our best colleagues and best friends. And that's why we're working on this guide note. That's why we're trying to promote biodiversity. And that's why I think that we have to work with farmers and with everybody to keep biodiversity our ally with, that's my message.
Adding to what Mercedes just said, I think what I would like to highlight is the general importance of diversity, but not only biodiversity, but the diversity of practices, of crops, but also of stakeholders and policy instruments. These are all key to finding the right solution to these really interconnected and complex problems or challenges. And I think that if we aim to integrate all these diverse aspects in developing the solution, then we obviously need to do it through dialogue and in a participatory way. And I think that both the IUCN Global Standard and the guidance documents can support this process.
Moi, je vais terminer par peut-être lever un certain nombre de défis, en tout cas que nous avons également dans le cadre des projets que nous menons. Le premier est lié à la question de l'accaparement des terres, et l'accaparement des ressources de façon globale, qui sont vraiment une contrainte pour la mise en place d'actions, en tout cas d'activités plus durables, mais également d'activités qui génèrent les revenus pour les communautés. Par exemple, au niveau des mangroves, on voit qu'il y a dans certaines zones, en tout cas, certaines populations qui veulent mener des activités de reboisement de mangroves, mais ces zones sont déjà accaparées par les gens qui ont beaucoup plus de ressources et qui veulent avoir ce qu'on appelle la maison pied dans l'eau. Et c'est une contradiction, en tout cas, dans la politique, parce que souvent, c'est des politiciens ou en tout cas des gens qui ont un certain niveau qui font cela. Et ça renforce un peu ce qu'on disait tout à l'heure par rapport au changement de politique et par rapport au plaidoyer et à la question de l'exploitation pétrolière en Afrique de l'Ouest, l'exploitation également des ressources naturelles qui mène, en tout cas, qui pose certaines inquiétudes aux communautés avec qui nous pratiquons, avec qui nous travaillons et qui nécessitent effectivement un vrai plaidoyer, en tout cas pour l'harmonisation des politiques si on veut aller vers une société plus stable et plus durable. Et le dernier élément, c'est par rapport à la transmission des savoirs entre les anciens, les aînés et les plus jeunes. J'ai rencontré des paysans qui nous disent que dans le cadre des certifications que l'on fait, on empêche par exemple aux enfants de travailler dans les champs. Et pour eux, ça, c'est une façon de dire de limiter en tout cas cette transmission de savoir. Parce que si au cours de l'activité de certification, on trouve des enfants dans le champ, on peut ne pas avoir son certificat pour exporter des produits. Et ça, c'est une limite pour la transmission des savoirs entre générations. C'est un point qui a été soulevé par certains producteurs et je voulais plus le ramener pour voir aussi au niveau des organismes de certification et au niveau des systèmes d'évaluation des produits, comment est-ce qu'on peut aussi prendre en compte cette dimension parce que la transmission des savoirs est également un élément important quand on parle d'agriculture et surtout d'agroécologie. Merci.
Merci Elhadji et merci à tous les intervenants pour ces mots de conclusion. And thank you all speakers for this concluding message. I will go ahead and launch the Menti. So attendees and participants, we have shared the link for the Menti in the chat. So please go ahead and click on that link. Otherwise, if the link doesn't work, go ahead and use menti.com right here, and then this code to access the survey. So I'll wait a few moments. And once you're joined, if you could kindly hit this like button, this thumbs up button, so that I know that there's more than one person in the survey. And I can proceed adequately. And speakers, I'll kindly request, since I can't see the chat, if there are any issues, do let me know. All right, I'll wait a few more seconds for people to join and then move on. All right. Any latecomers will be able to also view the questions. So first, we'd like to know, how did you like this dialogue? Comment avez-vous apprécié ce dialogue? How did we do? Did you enjoy it? All right, so we have 2, we really enjoyed it. 3, we liked it. 1, it was okay. Great. And sorry for the repeat question. It's supposed to say we didn't enjoy it at all. I'm glad no one's touched that yet. All right, we now have 5, 6. We really enjoyed it. Great. 4. All right. Go ahead and move on to the next question. Were the resources shared during the session useful? Did you find them relevant? Are you interested in learning more? I think our colleagues from IUCN shared the relevant links for their materials, but if there's anything from Elhadji and Charles, we're happy to share those as well upon request. Trouvez-vous les ressources, outils, etc. partagés lors de cette session utile? Je pense que nos collègues de l'IUCN ont déjà partagé les liens et les matériaux pertinents avec vous, mais si vous avez besoin plus de conseils ou plus de ressources, n'hésitez pas à nous le dire, surtout dans le contexte du projet d'Elhadji et de Charles. On sera ravis de vous donner des matériaux supplémentaires. So 13, very useful. 2, not sure, not certain. Great. What additional information would you like to receive? Apologies, colleagues, that's supposed to say sustainable livelihoods and NBS, not gender. Quelle information souhaiterez-vous recevoir en matière de moyens de subsistance durable? Désolée, mes collègues, c'est supposé dire moyens de subsistance durable, pas matière de genre. Désolée pour cette erreur. Et les SFN. Alors, n'hésitez pas de mettre vos réponses en français si vous préférez en français. Don't hesitate to put your answers in English in case happy to translate. So we have 2 quick access to up-to-date agriculture NBS guidance. Okay, so that's for our colleagues Orsi and Mercedes. Biomonitoring measurement tools. Okay, how to use the tools presented in the guidance. Okay, good questions. Outils de suivi, évaluation genrée. Okay. So this says tools for monitoring and evaluation that are gendered. All right, please reshare links to materials from presentations and follow-up email. Yes, so attendees, I will be following up shortly after this dialogue with the recordings as well as the presentations that we shared and highlighting any particular links that all of our speakers shared with you. So that will all come to your inboxes after this dialogue is over. Le mécanisme de partage des ressources naturelles, so the sharing mechanism for natural resources, monitoring and evaluation of projects, adaptability and learning as well. Good. Methods on how to use the biomonitoring tools. Tools that contribute or better or improve sustainable economic opportunities for women and young women. So maybe Al-Haji, si vous avez des ressources liées à cette réponse-là, elles seront bien appréciées. Partager des modules qui intègrent le genre et les SFN. OK, oui. Capacity building for rural communities on NBS. Great. Great suggestions. We'll make sure to follow up on as many as possible in our emails. Next question. How can we improve the next dialogue? What would you like to see? Is there anything that we missed with this dialogue that you're still curious about that maybe we can answer in our email or with further exchanges? Comment pouvons-nous améliorer le prochain dialogue? Que souhaiteriez-vous voir? Qu'est-ce qu'on a peut-être manqué dans ce dialogue qu'on peut peut-être suivre à une date prochaine? So more case studies, a request for more case studies. Yes, we always need more case studies and more lived experiences. So agreed with that response. Mettre la communication au centre de la mise à échelle des SFN. Yes, absolutely. Charles, this really goes along with what you were saying in terms of highlighting how we communicate our results and how we engage communities. Could we bring in people from the green investment sector to help bridge the financial part of the discussions? Excellent suggestion, yes. I think that's really relevant for the discussion that we plan on having in November. So that's actually a great suggestion for that dialogue. In November, we'll have a dialogue on financing NBS. So we'll definitely try to get multiple perspectives, and it would be great if we could bring in someone from that sector. Ça s'est passé bien globalement. Je pense que it went well globally. I think if I'm interpreting that correctly. Gouvernance inclusive et équitable des ressources naturelles. Absolutely. The dialogue following our our coastal ecosystems and coastal and marine ecosystems dialogue will focus on inclusive governance. And we're actually really excited about that one. We have multiple projects that are wanting to come in and speak about that. So tune in for that discussion because it will be lively. More time for presentation of case studies, absolutely. All right, go ahead and move to the next one. All right, last one. Any other comments or questions that we haven't touched on with this mentee or with the dialogue? We're happy to hear them. All right, doesn't look like it. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. If there are any, don't worry, I will be able to see them later. But as a reminder, our next dialogue is on September 5th on green infrastructure for resilience. We will be featuring one of the P4C projects called Sankasa that's led by IASD, as they are implementing in an urban environment in multiple different countries. So we will look forward to their perspectives as well as perspectives from our guest speakers that we're very excited about. So make sure to register for that in advance. And we set it a little bit after summer vacation, so hopefully there will be more of you present. Then, like I said, September 24th, we have the Safeguarding Coastal Communities. And then October, we follow with our inclusive governance and policy for supporting NBS projects. And then again, the financing NBS in October. And that will conclude our 2024 dialogue series. We hope to have more in the next year, but for now, this is what the structure is. I wanted to say thank you all, again, speakers, for your time and for your insights. I think it was a really enriching discussion and a very productive one. So thank you very much. And to our audience, if there are any questions about NAbSA or if you want to get connected with one of our speakers, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Veronica Reese, my colleague who also co-coordinates NAbSA alongside myself. And we will be more than happy to connect you with our colleagues that presented here today. So thank you so much. And yes, these are our emails. And as we circulate the PowerPoints, you will also have a link to our website where you can learn more information about NAbSA. So thank you once again. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day or your afternoons, wherever you're based. And that concludes this dialogue. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.